Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Packers Unscripted from Packers.com. I am Mike Spofford, joined, as always, by my trusted colleague, Weston Hodkowitz. We're coming to you here from our studios at Lambeau Field. Wes, our second draft recap show, and you put together an interesting little piece for Packers.com the other day where you sort of dug out through, whether it was through the interviews over draft weekend or the bio information that we got on the players. But one extra interesting little thing about each of the Packers' 11 draft picks that didn't quite work into our coverage over the weekend. So if you want to learn a little bit more about these guys, check that out on Packers.com. But
help me feed my family.
Yeah, of those various items. What one or ones stood out to you?
So first off, my main idea for doing this, we're always just looking for stuff to get us through the week before the rookie orientation camp. And my biggest prompt for this was, I thought the scouts last weekend were phenomenal.
Yeah.
Everybody that talked had something interesting to say, but because of the calamity and chaos of the draft, you and I only get to write so much about it. You did an excellent job of incorporating John Eric Sullivan's voice into your final recap story. I thought John Eric had probably one of the best press conferences of the entire weekend.
That was, as I mentioned in Insider Inbox, actually, that was my favorite press conference. No offense to anybody else. That was my favorite press conference of the entire weekend, was listening to John Eric kind of dig into the Packers process a little bit and really talk about what they're looking for and with regard to these prospects. So I tried to incorporate those comments in my wrap-up story, and if you want to check out the video of that press conference, by all means, it's on the website as well.
And for me, I'm not John Eric's agent, but I would take that 14-minate press conference and I would show it to every NFL team that is looking for a general manager 1 year from now. I thought it was very presidential in that way, or general managerial in that way. Be that as it may, you're asking me about the top 11 things to know about these 11 prospects. The two things that I enjoyed the most, this wasn't anything like an epiphany, but the Packers drafted yet another Georgia Bulldog. Digging into that a little bit with Javon Bullard coming in, that's the fourth time in 4 drafts the Packers have drafted 4 Georgia Bulldogs, obviously doubling up 2 years ago with Devontae White and Quay Walker. Prior to selecting Eric Stokes, though, the Packers had actually selected, the last time they had 4 Bulldogs that they got through the draft, it had been, I believe, 58 years. It had taken as far as how many times they drafted him, including Jarius Wynn in 2009.
Yeah.
One, I think that shows just where Kirby Smart has taken this program and the level that he's put it on. Mark Rick was there. They've obviously had success in the past, but I mean, we are talking about one of the top programs in the country now, and they're getting some of the top recruits and they're developing them. Bullard, is hopefully going to be the next one of that. In the 4th round, Evan Williams, I had to laugh. There was nowhere to put it in our coverage on Saturday, but 10 years after the Green Bay Packers draft Richard Rodgers, whose father and namesake was involved in the play, the Cal Stanford game, they go and take Evan Williams.
The band is on the field.
The band is on the field. They take Evan Williams, whose father was also on the field for Cal.
That's incredible. It's amazing. We were talking about this before we turned the cameras on. I mean, 1982, Cal versus Stanford, the game that is the big rivalry in the Bay Area in Northern California. And I mean, in this day and age of instant replay, that play would have meant absolutely nothing. For those, I'm sure many of you have seen it, if not all of you. There's the one guy's knees hit the ground before he laterals the ball, and then this is the part. This is the part I love.
A good story.
This is the part I love though when you look back at it, because these are the things. These are the things that are now caught by instant replay that our eyes don't necessarily catch in the moment. And it's when somebody is running full speed and they lateral the ball. It's an optical illusion to us that the ball is not moving forward, but it actually is, because if you look at, if somebody is running forward and then they lateral the ball is going to end up further down the field than where the player released it. So technically that's a forward lateral, and it would be illegal on a kickoff return, right? But in the moment, it looks legit, right?
Yeah.
It looks like, oh no, he didn't throw it. He didn't throw it forward. So, but there are a couple of those like in the Cal Stanford play and everything. But I about fell out of my chair when Evan Williams said, when he was asked, was it Matt Schneidman from The Athletic who asked him about his dad being involved in the play. The kickoff return in the Cal Stanford game with the trombone player getting run over.
This is the quote I love too. Once or twice a month where we're pulling it up or it's on TV somewhere. Yeah. It's like you can't even escape it either. It's omnipresent.
Yeah, absolutely. It's there. It's there forever. Well, another thing I wanted to get your thoughts on, because obviously on our last show we talked about all these Packer picks and all the implications and how the Packers went about putting together this collection of rookies. But we didn't talk much at all about what was going on in the rest of the NFC North, and this is a draft that, for one reason or another, is going to be remembered as far as the NFC North is concerned, because two of the four teams, the Bears and the Vikings, both drafted their quarterbacks of the future, with the Bears taking Caleb Williams. Again,
I thought you were going to say specialist.
The worst kept secret. No, I'll let you talk about the Bears punter if you want to later. The Bears taking Caleb Williams, number 1 overall, and then the Vikings sweating things out at the 11th pick, and then ultimately moving up one spot into the number 10 spot to get J.J. McCarthy, because they weren't sure. There was obviously the possibility that the Broncos or the Raiders might trade up into the number 10 spot with, was it the Jets? The Jets had the 10th spot.
Well, according to Sean Payton, he was involved in like 18 trades that day. But,
absolutely. There's all kinds of things.
But they wanted Bo Nix.
But it was interesting because a lot of people asked the question, well, why would they? The Jets aren't going to take a quarterback. Why are the Vikings trading up one spot? The Jets have Aaron Rodgers. They're not going to take a quarterback. Well, it's because they don't know if somebody else might jump in front of them and trade for that number 10 pick and get who many thought was really the last of the first round quarterbacks in J.J. McCarthy, or certainly the guy that the Vikings wanted. I think after Drake May was taken by the Patriots, when the Patriots wouldn't trade out of the number 3 spot, Elliott Wolf sticking at 3 and taking May from North Carolina. Just your thoughts on kind of how the top of that first round unfolded with all the quarterbacks, and then no trade was made until the 10th spot, when we were discussing the previous week, are the Patriots going to trade at 3, the Cardinals going to trade at 4, the Chargers going to trade at 5. Everybody sat and picked. And then the other interesting part of that is the Giants, sitting at number 6, did not take a quarterback.
Yeah.
They ended up going with a wide receiver.
Yeah, they did. And first and foremost, I don't do this just because of the Packer connections. I do this because I thought he did a whale of a job in his first NFL draft in the catbird seat there. And Elliott Wolf, dude, New England need to switch up their offense. They go their first 5 picks, they go on the offensive side of the ball. It starts with Drake May. Not that you want stuff leaking out. I know how NFL franchises feel about that, but I actually I thought that made the Patriots look great in terms of what Minnesota was trying to give up to move there. And it's showing just how dedicated Elliott was to Drake May and this being the next guy.
Yeah, he absolutely was convinced that Drake May has got to be their guy, because if the reports that were out there are true, Elliott Wolf passed up some very, very attractive trades to trade out of the number 3 spot, and he did not want to do it, which shows you how he feels about Drake May as the Patriots.
So the Chicago Bears obviously go with Caleb Williams. They go with the receiver at 9, and now you wait and see. I don't really like Twitter. Go figure. I know Bear fans are talking about the new era and everything like that. We've heard that a lot over the last 10 years. Maybe Williams is the guy everybody thought he was, but there's going to be that pressure on him now. And seeing how he handles that is going to be very interesting. The Packers just so happened to draft his running back in Marshawn Lloyd coming to Green Bay. He had very complimentary things to say about him as well. But I don't think there's been a more celebrated, decorated number 1 overall pick. I mean, this guy, I'd put him up there against Trevor Lawrence and Andrew Luck in terms of guys that are just expected to come in and be MVP-type players.
Yeah.
The Bears have everything staked to him. They did not pick very much in this draft. they everyone talks about all the additions they made in free agency and through trades and that. Well, they had to. They didn't have the equity to be able to do that through the draft. So
and they even gave up a future draft pick to get back into this draft to take an additional player, because after the first round, when they took Williams at number 1, they took their wide receiver Rome Odunze from Washington at number 9. The Bears only had 2 other picks in the entire draft, and they sacrificed a pick next year to get another player for this year.
If the cupboard's bare, you got to put some groceries in it, right?
You do.
So I mean that's what they did. Minnesota, I don't want to say you're all in, but this is it. This was the move. This was the draft where they made some big moves, and certainly when you look at it, I know Dallas Turner I think he's already the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year.
Defensive Rookie
of the Year, excuse me.
Yes.
Defensive Rookie of the Year.
Yeah.
So they still felt like they helped their defense, but the J.J. McCarthy move was one I told you going into the draft. I mean, not that I knew this. Everybody knew this. The Vikings had to draft a quarterback.
Yeah.
You had to get one. And with where they were sitting, you were in that is Penix going to be there? Is it McCarthy? Is McCarthy going to go higher? Bo Nix, I think everybody kind of assumed would be in that range, but is he the guy? And if you're taking 6 quarterbacks in the top 12, how good do you feel about the 6th guy actually being the best of the bunch? Maybe not great.
Yeah.
J.J. McCarthy ends up being the guy. They have Sam Darnold. That doesn't mean he has to play right away, but so much is staked to this change at quarterback. And I'm not trying to put together an ad campaign for how the Packers develop quarterbacks in contrast to what has been the situation in Minnesota now for many years. But when you don't have a quarterback, it makes the job a lot more difficult. And they finally made the decision, you know what? We paid Kirk Cousins a lot of money for a lot of years. He got them to a certain point, but they couldn't get past that point. So now we're going to kind of try to rebuild while still competing. And the one danger I feel is there for the Vikings is the number 1 overall pick, the guy that was just talking about how celebrated he's been, and Caleb Williams goes to a division team. Another division team was in the NFC Championship game, and then you have the Green Bay Packers, who were the hottest team in football during the final month of the season.
Yeah.
The Vikings don't have a lot of room there to pace themselves. They kind of have to catch up if they're going to stay in this thing, and this was their move.
Well, and what's interesting to me, and I mean, who knows whether J.J. McCarthy is ultimately going to be the guy or not. But what's interesting to me is how we keep hearing out of Minnesota that they're going to be patient. They're going to, they're going to bring J.J. McCarthy along slowly, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's all fine and good to say right now, but the guy you have starting at quarterback, presumably week 1, will be Sam Darnold, who has, I believe it's like a 20-something and 37 record as a starting quarterback in the NFL. Yeah. If you do start out with Sam Darnold because you're going to bring J.J. McCarthy along slowly and not put all this pressure on him, well, then what happens when you lose a few games?
It's 21-35, by the way.
21-35, yeah. Thank you. 21-35 as a starting quarterback. You start losing some games, the fans pay good money to buy the tickets and to come out and support the team. And, if the Vikings do start out losing some games, there's going to be a lot of pressure to put J.J. McCarthy in there and for the Vikings to show their fans what they have. Are they going to resist that? I mean, what will be the decision-making process down the line? Now, maybe Sam Darnold, maybe this is the reclamation of his career. We saw it with Geno Smith in Seattle. You can't rule it out,
Never
right?
Can.
Not going to rule it out. But the Vikings are potentially going to be in a really tough spot here.
The pressure for the fans is I'm with you on that. That is 100% correct. But you've also, the strength of your football team right now is your receiving core.
Yep.
You have arguably the best receiver in the game right now in Justin Jefferson. Jordan Addison showed a lot of nice things last year as well. You need a guy that's going to be able to feed those players. Kirk Cousins, people can talk about primetime Kirk, or you want to talk about the playoff Kirk, but he got the ball out into those guys' hands. He allowed them to make plays.
Yep.
That's the biggest switch they're going with, because when I was talking about this, Minnesota's almost kind of been, you heard that stat about how few first-round quarterbacks they've ever drafted. They hit on Dante Culpepper, but then injuries became an issue for him. And then after that, it was just sort of plug-and-play guys other than Christian Ponder.
Yeah, they drafted Christian Ponder with a first-round pick. I believe he was 12th overall.
Yep.
But quite frankly, the only year they did anything with Christian Ponder was when Adrian Peterson was the league MVP with a 2,000-yard rushing season in 2012.
Yep.
That was the only year with Christian Ponder that they went anywhere. So you're right. There's been this interesting history with Minnesota and how they've gone about it.
Yeah. So this is where it's going to get really interesting, this division. I love what Detroit did again. I thought they had some really savvy picks in this thing. They moved around. They helped their defense some. Again, Brad Holmes, John Dorsey, I tip my cap to them. I felt like as soon as John came on board there too, and obviously Brad's track record speaks for itself. They've done it. It's not a mystery why they were in the NFC Championship game. They've drafted really, really well these last few years, beginning in 2021 with Amon-Ra St. Brown in the 4th round. Brian Branch gets involved. It looks like Aiden Hutchinson is going to be a player. So the competition in the North, I think, is going to be really strong this year. Now, fortunately for everybody, there's 7 playoff spots now in the NFC. If you want to get in on this party, there are tickets to go.
Yeah.
But certainly for the Packers, for Minnesota, for all these teams, you have to put yourself in a position to compete, neutralize the other team's strengths, and see where it takes you.
Yeah. What'd you think of Detroit's move, essentially using 2 picks because they traded up to get the cornerback from Alabama, Terry and Arnold?
Yeah, good. The one thing that you and I talked about afterwards, between him and Rakestraw, they got 2 of the top corners in the draft, but also 2 of the guys that tested slower when you're looking at more of those 40 times.
Yeah, looking at the 40 times.
So if that's the identity of their defense, if they're going to go press man and play physical, which I mean to a certain extent that is what you're expecting.
That's Dan Campbell.
Dan Campbell. That's why is his name escaping me right now? The defensive coordinator over there.
Aaron Glenn.
Thank you, Aaron Glenn.
Right? Yeah.
Yes.
Aaron Glenn.
Defensive backs.
Yep.
Smash mouth in your face. When they've turned this corner with their personnel, that's the identity they've tried to keep for really the last 2.5 years now. So, yeah, I think in a lot of ways it made sense for them. I felt like offensively they've built out that offensive line so well. They've hit on their draft picks at the skill positions. I mean, you would not, if Justin wants to bring up the old clips of our pre-draft stuff last year, I was not sold on Sam Laporta. I thought he was a little too small. I knew the history there with Iowa tight ends, but you had all these really big, the 6'6", 6'5" guys in this thing. Sam Laporta was as good as anyone in that draft last year and made a huge difference in that offense. So it'll be fascinating to watch how this develops for Detroit, but this was, as much as we talk about this being an important draft for the Packers because you've had 2 really good ones back-to-back and you're trying to put that 3rd one together to make a Super Bowl run, the Lions are sitting in the same seat.
Yeah, one last thought I want to get from you with regard to the first round of the draft, because a lot of people are talking about it as,
Remember, wasn't it cute, by the way, when I said Michael Penix would go in the first round or not? Yeah. And he went at 8. Sorry to interrupt.
No, and that's exactly what I was going to bring up, because that is the move where people are talking about, okay, the sort of the Packers blueprint for quarterback succession, right? The Falcons went out. Things didn't work out with Desmond Ridder, who they drafted a couple years back in the 3rd round. The Falcons had been using their first-round picks. They had 3 consecutive years of top 10 picks, and they took a tight end, a wide receiver, and a running back. They did not draft a quarterback. They did not draft a premium position. They didn't go left tackle or edge rusher or corner. They went with the flashy offensive players, but then with a 3rd-round quarterback, it didn't happen. It didn't get done. So they went out, spent a bunch of money to get Kirk Cousins, perhaps broke some rules along the way, but we'll find out about that when the league's tampering investigation is complete, which apparently it's not yet.
Yeah.
But they go out and sign Kirk Cousins to a whole bunch of money. They guarantee him somewhere in the neighborhood of $100 million. But then they have another top 10 pick this year, and they use it on a quarterback in Michael Penix Jr. from Washington, with the idea that he will sit, I think, for a minimum of 3 years, but at least a minimum of 2 years, he will sit behind Kirk Cousins, watch and learn, and then eventually get the keys to the car. I mean, the Falcons have a reasonable out cap-wise on Cousins' contract after 3 years. They signed him to a 4-year deal. But they have a reasonable out after 3 years. But I think that it's going to have to go those 3 years before you turn it over to Penix. Otherwise, you're putting yourself in salary cap jail when you're trying to turn things over to a new quarterback, and that just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
I'm going to answer this in several different ways. The first one is to all the haters out there that were talking about, well, why didn't they go defense? Because the Falcons need to figure out their offense first before we can even – their defense isn't great. Fine. Their offense wasn't great.
Yeah.
And The only part that I laugh at, that I actually giggled when I saw, Penix come off the board at 8 was, for all that time, they didn't give Arthur Smith a single quarterback.
Yeah.
They fire him, and then they spend all this money on Kirk Cousins, and they use the 8th overall pick on Penix. That was pretty humorous to me. Not to say that they would have drafted another one and it would have worked out, but it was just funny that they never actually had that guy. They were trying to roll with a former third round pick.
Yeah.
So that being said, I actually really like the pick. I think that this is if you have an administration and you have an owner that can be understanding and see a little bit past just what's directly in front of them and what you could potentially do, this was the move for the Falcons. Because with all due respect to Kirk Cousins, he has only gotten to a certain point in his NFL career as a starting quarterback. He's not any younger, and he's coming off an Achilles tear. Made total sense that they did whatever they had to do to sign him. But Penix is a guy that you've heard so many people talk about his arm strength being generational, talking like, this is a guy that, maybe Matthew Stafford-esque type strength and his ability to deliver a football.
Yeah.
If you can give that coaching staff time to bring him along and not throw him into the fire like we've done so often, Mike, yes, C.J. Stroud last year was an exciting football player, and it looks like he's going to be a real playmaker for years to come. I can't see any scenario in which Bryce Young benefited from what happened last year in Carolina.
Exactly.
Nothing.
That's the thing. It's you throw these young guys into the fire right away. Sometimes you get, a Joe Burrow or a C.J. Stroud, and sometimes you get Bryce Young. I mean, and it's not necessarily about the guy. It's about the environment. It's about the situation. It's about the status of the rest of the team as a whole. Mike McCarthy always used to say, it's not about whether a young quarterback is ready to play. It's about whether the team is ready for the young quarterback to play. And so some of these guys just get thrown into situations that are really, really difficult, and the Falcons are going to do their best. The Vikings, it sounds like, are going to try that as well. The Falcons are going to do their best to avoid that, and the difference between the two situations is the Falcons spent a lot of money on a veteran quarterback who has taken teams to the playoffs before, as opposed to the Vikings, who, their guy right now is a guy who hasn't won in the NFL.
You're absolutely right, but I really thought you were going to go with the difference is the Falcons paid Kirk Cousins and the Vikings did not pay Kirk Cousins.
Yeah.
After all that, I mean,
that's certainly true as well.
But here's the thing, and this is where this will be my last point on this, and this is the thing I wanted to hit on the most. Where the Green Bay Packers have outdone the rest of the National Football League is they've caught the league sleeping on quarterbacks at the right time. They caught the NFL sleeping on Aaron Rodgers in 2005. They caught the league sleeping on Jordan Love in 2020.
Right.
You are not going to be able to find franchise quarterbacks every year past that number 10, 15 spot. There's just teams are moving up. They're trying to make things happen. The Packers' ability to do that, when people try to make this comparison, well, they spent so high to get Penix. Yeah, because that's normally what teams have
exactly.
to do.
That is what you have to do. And that was part of when the Falcons head coach and general manager were answering questions about the Penix pick. They were saying, hey, we spent a bunch of money on Kirk Cousins, but we know we're going to need a quarterback down the line. We're not expecting to end up with a top 10 pick with Kirk Cousins as our quarterback.
You're going to be back.
So, right, you're going to be further back in the first round. So if we're looking at the quarterback of the future, we have to get him now while we have the high pick, because we're planning to be picking in the 20s or later because of what we're paying Kirk Cousins to do for the franchise.
And the last point I'll make about that 2020 draft, people always say, well, T. Higgins was still available, Patrick Queen was still available, but Denzel Mims was also still available. I took Ross Blacklock in one of my mock drafts that year. He ended up going at 40, and he's out of the league at 25.
Right.
You never know. The Packers knew they had something there with Jordan Love. There was a good scouting report on him. We listened to Sam Seal last weekend talking about, he had a hand in looking at Love as well. When you feel good about guys, when we talk about best player available and all that stuff, and it's not always true in terms of, if you're not going to, Packers were not going to draft a quarterback this year. They didn't need to in the first round or second round. But the truth is when you build that board, as you talked about on our last show, you bake it into the cake and you see what's all available to you. I think that's the most exciting thing. And if I'm an Atlanta Falcons fan, I don't care about the fact that Cousins was signed and Penix was drafted at number 8. I care about the fact that finally I feel like I have a quarterback. I have multiple quarterbacks, and there's a reason to believe again because, Mike, I think Atlanta was the number one example of if you don't have a guy, whether it was trying to bring in Marcus Mariota or doing the Desmond Ridder experiment or all these different things they've done since Matt Ryan left.
Right.
You're going to fall into that kind of purgatory in the league, and you're not going to be high enough to get a top guy, and you're also not going to be low enough.
And if you don't have that guy, it doesn't matter what you put around it.
Yep.
They were trying to do it by putting the best possible playmakers around that guy, but if that guy is not the guy, it's not going to work.
You can give me Kobe steak, Mike. I'm not going to be able to do much with it. You know what I mean? Like if you can have the best ingredients possible, but you have to have somebody that's going to cook with it.
I'll just say quickly too, with regard to the 2020 draft, Patrick Queen was the guy that I really liked, and I was disappointed the Packers did not take him. And Patrick Queen's a solid NFL player, but the Ravens didn't even bring him back on a second contract. He became a free agent and went and signed somewhere else.
And I bet you got pretty excited when ESPN threw up that comparison graphic for Adrian Cooper too. Patrick Queen.
There we go.
Whom the Packers were able to get at 45 overall.
Yeah, there we go.
That's the game.
A little bit of sponsor business here. Sirius XM NFL Radio delivers hard-hitting analysis and up-to-the-minute NFL news that true football fanatics need 24/7, 365. And at Cousins Subs, we have something for everyone, like our Wisconsin cheese curds, mac and cheese, golden fries, and creamy shakes, all paired with your favorite sub or sub in a bowl. Cousins Subs, 50-plus years of better. Last thing before we go, Wes, rookie minicamp is this weekend. The players are actually arriving in Green Bay today, going through all sorts of orientation stuff, physicals, get their equipment, get their shoes, their helmet, all kinds of stuff, figure out where they get food, learn the building a little bit. We will get a chance to talk to players in the locker room on Friday. We'll also get a chance to watch some of the first practice on Friday. Just quickly, your approach, your thoughts on kind of what you like to keep your eye on during this rookie minicamp.
Two things I always enjoy watching is one, seeing who the tryout players end up being. There always ends up being a name or two that you don't expect that ends up being involved with it, and then occasionally you find a Lucas Patrick out of this bunch that ends up being a player for you. The undrafted process does not just begin and end immediately after the draft. It'll keep going on. Another guy that speaks to that is Emmanuel Wilson last year, starting with Denver, getting cut, ending up with Green Bay, makes a 53-man roster.
Right.
That's always neat to see. But the other thing I enjoy about it, it's not going to be overly competitive. You're not going to see guys, there's going to be no scuffles. There'll be nothing like that. Everyone will be on their best behavior. And the Packers are mostly just going to want to get these guys growing accustomed to what they're going to expect when they come back for OTAs in the format of those practices. But it's always neat when you can see the athleticism of these guys. And that's really all you're going to be able to see. You're going to be able to see the speed. You're going to be able to see the way they catch the ball, or in Michael Pratt's case, the way he throws the ball.
Yeah.
That to me is where it's the first time you get eyes on these guys, because you can look at their highlights, you can see their bios and all the things that they accomplished in college, but this is the first time you actually get to see the players in the semi-uniform and kind of going about their process. And it's a weird thing because, we do like a bunch of interviews and then we watch the practice, then Matt will talk, then we'll watch another practice. So you only learn so much, but I think it gives you a definite feel. Like, for example, the first time we saw Lucas Van Ness, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is why this guy was drafted 13th overall.
Yeah,
he looks like a Greek god.
Right. Yeah, looking at it, it's always interesting to me looking at just getting a chance to see what they look like physically on the field with their helmet on, even though they're not in pads. It's just shorts and helmets. But seeing what they look like physically when okay, this isn't your college team anymore. This is more the cream of the crop of the college guys. Even when you're talking the tryout guys who don't have a contract, those are still the guys who were the cream of the crop in college. It's not just 85 scholarship players on one sideline. But then the other thing that always strikes me is just watching some of the fundamental stuff, like how do guys catch the ball? I mean, I'll never forget it. It's always stood out to me, the 2013 rookie minicamp. One of the things, and for whatever reason that day, I don't know exactly why, but the Packers were doing all kinds of punt and punt return drills in that rookie minicamp practice. And Micah Hyde is back there fielding punts.
Yep.
And he looked as natural and as smooth and easy catching all, these wobbly punts and everything else as anybody I'd ever seen as a rookie. It's just you look at that guy and you go, yeah, that's a baller. Like there was nothing that was going to faze that guy, and sure enough, he was just a rookie 5th-round pick out of Iowa who ran too slow at the time, and we all know what he became for both the Packers and the Buffalo Bills. So those are the kinds of things that are always interesting to watch here. And it's such a brief introduction. They get the playbook and they get I don't know, a half a dozen or a dozen plays just to They get a quarterback like Michael Pratt to just learn how to spit out a couple of different plays in the huddle, and to get everybody on the same page and whatnot. Because as you said, the next step then is toward the end of this month when the OTAs begin. They're thrown in there with all the veterans, and then it's like, okay, this is going to be a real non-padded but a real NFL practice that these guys are going to be in, and they get 3-4 weeks of that, including the mini camp in the middle of June.
And one other thing to mention too, just very quickly with Michael Pratt, because OTAs are going to come around and it'll be just like training camp where it's predominantly Jordan Love, and Sean Clifford will get some snaps as well. But as we learned, I think it was yesterday, Alex Magoo is going to be making the switch over to receiver now. So Michael Pratt is sitting in that number 3 spot. That means that you're not going to be the 4th guy up. You're going to be the 3rd guy up.
Yeah.
So if if things coming down and trickle to your OTAs, you have to be ready for that moment. It sounds like the young man has that disposition about him, but again, one of the reasons why when you think of like Sean Clifford jumping in the way he did, or even Tim Boyle back in 2018, they set that tone right from the beginning of the OTAs to make their case for making a roster, for being the number 2 quarterback. And every opportunity matters. So even if it is, if you don't really recognize anybody right away, you try to just figure things out while you're out there. It's all reviewed, it's all graded, and ultimately that's how you start setting a depth chart as you get into training camp.
Yeah, nobody wins or loses any jobs during the rookie minicamp, except maybe the tryout guys, of course. But I'm talking about the draft picks and the undrafted guys who have already signed. Nobody wins or loses any jobs during the rookie minicamp, but first impressions do matter in that, and these guys know that.
Yeah, and it's exciting too, because there's very few times where you and I will go out there and it's just you're looking at a completely new football team. There'll usually be like maybe 40, between 35, 50 guys that are out there on the field, depending on how big the UFA class is and how many returning veterans are eligible to participate in it. But it's again, it's setting out the books and pens and papers for the first day of school. Mm-hmm. It's another step towards getting back towards the season and ultimately figuring out if any of these 11 guys can make the impact that that draft class did a year ago.
Absolutely. Well, on our next show, we will share some of our first impressions with regard to the rookie minicamp. But for now, we'll call it a wrap on this edition of Packers Unscripted. Be sure to follow all of our coverage of the team. Everything with regard to rookie minicamp that we have access to, we will cover it to the best of our ability on Packers.com. For Wes, I am Mike. Thank you for tuning in, everybody. We will see you next time.